Thanks, Mr. Chairman. What we see at our border is not just bad luck or a one-off phenomena. It is the predictable result of this administration's chosen path on immigration. Make no mistake, Donald Trump takes pride in being the most anti-immigrant president in modern history. And at the same time, his border security strategy is producing the worst results in our history. Let's look at the highlights. The Muslim travel ban created chaos at airports across the United States and continues to separate thousands of American families. The repeal of DACA threatened 800,000 young immigrants with deportation to countries they barely remember. The termination of temporary protected status endangers another 300,000 immigrants. The disastrous separation of infants, toddlers, and young children from their families at our border finally stopped by the courts. The longest government shutdown in the history of the United States, which paralyzed our immigration courts for 6 weeks. The tragic deaths of 6 children who were apprehended at the border and 24 people in immigration detention. And now, public reports of attempted suicides by detainees being held in abject, inhumane conditions. The blocking of all assistance to Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and shutting down avenues for legal migration, which has driven more refugees to our border. And a gaping leadership vacuum at the Department of Homeland Security. In less than 2.5 years, there have already been 4 heads of this department. We have before us today an acting secretary who's been on the job for more than 2 months. We cannot face this crisis effectively with a revolving door policy in the leadership of the Department of Homeland Security. In fact, every position at DHS with responsibility for immigration or border security is now being held by a temporary appointee who has not been confirmed by the Senate. The White House has not even submitted nominations for these positions. Despite all of President Trump's tough talk and meanness, our southern border today, by every measurable standard, is much less secure than when he took office. Look at the numbers. In just the last 3 months, more people have been apprehended at the border than in all of fiscal year 2017. We have to acknowledge the obvious. President Trump's immigration and border security policies are certifiable failures. And we have learned we cannot count on his administration to work with us on rational immigration policy. This committee, the Senate Judiciary Committee, must assert its constitutional authority. I'm hopeful because I know this chairman. I've worked with this chairman on bipartisan immigration solutions. We were partners in the Gang of 8. We wrote a comprehensive immigration bill which passed the Senate 6 years ago. In 2013 by a margin of 68 to 32, a bipartisan bill. Republican Senator Lamar Alexander, who supported our 2013 bill, was right when he recently said, and I quote, "If that bill had become law, most of the problems we're having today we wouldn't be having." Last year, Chairman Graham and I crafted a bipartisan agreement, including robust border security funding and dozens of provisions to strengthen border security. President Trump rejected it. Instead pushed for a hardline plan with the largest reduction in legal immigration in almost a century. The Senate rejected the Trump bill by a bipartisan supermajority. Chairman Graham and I also were the lead sponsors of the DREAM Act, which would address the DACA crisis created by President Trump. However, as I've told the chairman, at this moment, the bill that he brings before the committee is one that I cannot currently support, but want to work with him to see if there is a middle ground. That's why we were sent here. This bill in and of itself, I don't believe that being proposed by the chairman will solve the crisis at the border, but let it be a starting point. I don't like the fact that this bill would overturn critical humanitarian protections for children, subjecting them to even longer detention and deportation without due process. There is no evidence that this will deter desperate families from fleeing to our border. And the bill before us provides no assurance that children will be humanely treated or that they'll be safe from violence once they are deported. This bill does nothing to address the root causes that are causing migrants to flee their homes in record numbers. Instead, I would ask the chairman to work with Democrats on a bipartisan, smart, effective, and humane answer to this challenge, which would include assistance to stabilize the Northern Triangle, cracking down on the traffickers that are exploiting immigrants, in-country processing and third-country resettlement so that migrants can find safe haven without making that dangerous trek to our border, and eliminating immigration court backlogs so that asylum claims can be processed more quickly. Mr. Chairman, this is indeed a crisis. It is a test of our mettle as members of the United States Senate, but it's also a test of this nation of immigrants. We are writing a record we will have to explain to the next generation. The zero tolerance policy is one of the saddest chapters in modern immigration history. We cannot return to that inhumane approach, that deterrent approach, as some call it, at the expense of our values as a nation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.